Hello, my name is Maya Donahoe, and today I will be talking about infant mortality for my individual presentation topic. So first, I would just like to define the problem. Later on in the presentation, we're going to talk about policies and programs that have been set in place to help fight this issue. So by defining the problem, we'll have a better understanding of these policies' purposes and just get a better idea of what this problem means. Infant mortality is the term used to define the death of a baby within the first year of the child's life. This would be any time from the day that a child is born to their 364th day of life. More specifically, infant mortality only defines deaths that occur after birth and is used as one of many indicators of population health. So this does not include things such as miscarriage or stillbirth, since this is strictly after a child is born. Additionally, neonatal mortality is used to define the death of a child before they are 28 days old, so this is just another type of infant mortality, just a bit more specific. And lastly, infant mortality rate, which is something that most all of us are likely familiar with, and something that we will talk a lot about later on, describes the number of deaths out of every 1,000 live births. So here are just some fast stats on infant mortality. As of 2019 in the United States, there were 558 infant deaths per 100,000 live births, which averages an infant mortality rate of 5.8%. On the other hand, other countries across the world have as many as 60, 70, or even 80 plus infant deaths per 1,000 live births. This graph right here shows infant mortality rates for the United States alone, beginning in 1960 and going all the way until 2019, which isn't labeled here on the graph, but on the far right, that is where the last indicator is. And as you can see in 2019, like I mentioned before, infant mortality rate is just under 6%. And while there has been a lot of progress with infant mortality rates in the last few decades, there's still a lot more work to be done, and this is still a very pressing issue. What causes infant mortality? The CDC identifies a few major factors that could potentially cause infant mortality, which are the 5 highlighted in blue. And those 5 factors of infant mortality are birth defects, which include any structural change to a part of the body that affects how it looks or how it functions, preterm birth, and low birth weight, which defines birth before 37 weeks or birth of a child weighing less than 5.5 pounds, maternal pregnancy complications, which involve any health issue that occurred during pregnancy that affect either the mom, the baby, or both. Sudden infant death syndrome, also known as SIDS, is used to define the death of a child less than a year old that occurred suddenly or unexpectedly, most of which occurred during accidental suffocation or other issues during sleep. And lastly, injuries that include anything from drowning to falling or consumption of something poisonous. And there are many, many other injuries, but these are just a few. And as you can tell here, these 5 indicators from the CDC, these are all related to the pregnancy and the birth itself. And while these do pose a large risk, and these are some of the main causes of infant mortality, there's also quite a few more, some of which are sanitization, available resources, living conditions, lack of or poor prenatal care, maternal substance abuse, as well as unavailable medical infrastructure. These are all environmental factors that can also take a toll on mother and lead to infant mortality. Who is most affected? Infant mortality affects non-Hispanic Black, Native Hawaiian, and American Indian populations significantly more than other ethnicities. Even after years of consistent efforts to lower these rates, some racial groups are just more affected than others. For example, Black infants are more than twice as likely to die than white infants, and this ratio just continues to increase year after year. Secondly, underdeveloped countries as well as poor or impoverished areas are also at risk due to lack of resources and education, unsanitary environments, unstable living conditions, and little to no reliable health care. These are all things that I just talked about just a second ago as causes of infant mortality that are just very prevalent in underdeveloped or poor impoverished areas that lead to their high infant mortality rates. And here's just infant mortality on a large scale of the world and also a little bit smaller scale in regards to the US. In the world, the country with the lowest rate of infant deaths is Iceland, where only 0.16% of all infants die, compared to the 9% of infant deaths in Central African Republic, which holds the highest rate of infant deaths in the world. On a little bit of a smaller scale, in the United States, the CDC shows that Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and North Dakota had the highest infant mortality rates, averaging between 7.14% and 11.46%. Quite a bit higher than the infant mortality rates in countries like Iceland. Here's a map of infant mortality rates by state. As you can see, the 4 states that I just mentioned previously are in the dark green color, and those are the ones with the highest infant mortality rates. But as you can also see, Oklahoma is just in the next lowest category for infant mortality rates. Along with all those other states in the teal color, they have infant mortality rates of 6.37 to 7.12%. So this map just gives you a great idea of how pressing the issue is all over the United States. Here is the CDC's state report for Oklahoma on a variety of health indicators, and this is something that we actually reviewed a little bit in class this past week. At the very top, we can see how the state of Oklahoma has been graded a D for infant mortality. Many things contribute to these high rates of infant mortality in Oklahoma, a few of which are actually highlighted here on the report, such as poor physical activity, low birth weight, and poverty, which I talked about earlier as contributing factors. As you can see, we scored poorly in each of those 3 indicators, a D, C, and another D. All of those low ratings contribute to the low rating of infant mortality, along with many, many other factors. But compared to the rest of the U.S., Oklahoma is definitely not doing so well when it comes to this issue, which is why it is so relevant. Then here we have some policies that are currently in place to fight infant mortality. In Oklahoma, the Healthy Start program is one of the most active programs in decreasing both maternal and infant mortality. The Healthy Start program begins working with mothers and families early in the pregnancy to develop a clear and thought-out plan on maintaining a safe and healthy pregnancy as well as birth. They offer many medical resources for families, social services, and continue to assist the family for up to 2 years after the child is born to assure the family is meeting basic needs and support. This program has had a huge impact on lowering infant mortality rates in the state of Oklahoma in the last few years because they offer assistance up to 2 years after the child is born. They leave a huge impact, making sure that they are involved and making sure the families are meeting their needs during that first year of the child's life, which is critical. Count the Kicks is another program advocating for decreasing infant mortality rates by increasing healthy pregnancies through their free app. The Count the Kicks app encourages mothers to pay close attention to their baby's movements through tracking so they can know what is normal for their child and ask for help when they notice a change. This app quite literally allows moms to count their kicks and the movements of their child during pregnancy, most specifically during their 3rd trimester when a child is most active. So this app gives moms diagrams and charts to show what their child's movements should be looking like or what they looked like just last week so that mothers can know what's normal for them and what's abnormal. This program overall helps promote better education for expected activity for babies as well as decreased rate of stillbirths and infant mortality. And here are just a few more policies. The Ohio Housing Finance Agency was set in place just a few years ago in 2016 to give new and expecting mothers better housing opportunities through rental assistance as well as free housing. This program helps ensure mothers and families are living in clean and reliable housing while pregnant and while raising their child. The OHFA helps promote better family planning practices as well as reducing adverse birth outcomes. And lastly, the Safe to Sleep program is a campaign that aids to educate populations on healthy sleep practices for infants to reduce the risk of sudden infant death syndrome, also known as SIDS, one of the leading causes of infant mortality. And then lastly, right here is just all of the sources that I used to complete this presentation, as well as sources that I found most helpful when researching this topic.